Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for August 29th. And yeah, just a little bit of presidential preamble before we start. There's some shots, some photoshopped shots of President Obama going around that are pretty hilarious. A few days ago, I talked about a documentary on, celebrating the 100th anniversary of America's national parks. And it features Obama in it, narrating it. Anyways, apparently the people who were involved in making that brought an HMD into the Oval Office, let him try it, and in this picture that's been circulating, he's looking up. Only it's been photoshopped 10 ways to Tuesday and just has him literally in some hilarious situations. Some of them, granted, are a little more political than others, but overall, they're worth a chuckle at least anyways. So let's dive into it, guys. News. Sec, guys. This one is a doozy and definitely requires a quick schlock. There once was a noble fighting franchise. Dead or Alive was its name, and I remember way back on the PlayStation, it was a fighting game. It was a fighting game pretty much like any other fighting game. Yeah, admittedly, it had some nice female models, the polygons, as attractive as they, I suppose, could be on a PlayStation. But yeah, it was a fighting game. And then, probably on the same frickin' train that Konami's been on when they basically single-handedly are destroying their IP with Pachinko. But that's neither here nor there, a whole other video. No, the same train, but a different turn, and this one went right into Fanserviceville. You see, there was a point in time, and nobody's kind of really sure exactly when that happened, but the once noble fighting game, Dead or Alive, took a turn for the worse and strictly became about fan service. All right. And I'd gotten used to kind of face palming, eye rolling with Dead or Alive volleyball, beach volleyball, because again, it was mostly fan service. And look, if there's people who are into that, power to you. I've dated a lot of real women. Kidding. Not to say you haven't. I understand fan service is your thing. Cool. It's not mine, but I'm not going to judge you, right? But I am going to judge the guy that was wearing the HMD on the video that's circulating that I'm going to link below, because Buddy was perving it up big time. So there's going to be a Dead or Alive VR game for the Sony. And the footage literally shows a bikini babe on a beach and El Pervo with some kind of tickle stick. I'm assuming something like this, but in-game it looked literally like some kind of fetish tickle stick or something. But he's pushing her boobies, pushing the butt cheeks, and seems to be really engaged in it, right? Hey, power to you. Whatever knocks your socks off, whatever floats your boat, whatever your deal is. Different strokes for different folks. It's all good. I'm not judging. I'm just saying. That's all. I'm just saying. So yeah, there's that game if you want it. Link below. Now, next one. I'm not a religious guy, and I've pretty much said that on this channel, but I don't judge anybody for their beliefs. Your beliefs are your beliefs, right? I happen to be atheist agnostic, and if gods were real, I'd probably want to, tip mugs with Odin the Allfather before some of the other ones, right? But hey, again, if that's your thing, hey, power to you. Now, there's a movie called Jesus VR, and I didn't make up the name. It can only be equaled by Jesus Christ Superstar, which was a real kind of cheesy production in the 70s that most of you have never seen, and you're probably not missing anything. But yeah, this one is called Jesus VR, The Story of Christ, and as to be expected, has a big focus on the Crucifixion act, right? And whatever your stance on that is, all seriousness, joking aside, because I was just joking if you couldn't tell, bad IT humor, I know. But in all seriousness, it depicts it, and in a really in-your-face, visceral way, right? So if you are religious and a Christian to boot, or just somebody who's moved by religious experience, there's a movie for you. It's a 360. They're billing it as the first virtual reality movie. That's why I'm talking about it here. And it's being shown at, I believe it was the Venice Film Festival is where it will be premiering. So yeah, if that's your thing, take a look. The link will be below. And like I said, if you're in Europe and you're close by to Venice, check it out. It will be there. Now, on to a more serious news topic. And this has to do with rating systems. So there's an article on Upload VR that asks a really good fundamental question about the rating system. Now, let's talk about the rating system just for a little bit. I am fortunate enough to have family. Well, I won't count my mom's German side, but growing up in Holland, then in Canada, to live in two countries that don't ban video games, right? In Canada, the whole notion of a rating system doesn't really matter much. Canada's never banned a video game, ever. And you can look that up. I think it's the United Arab Emirates. I think they're top dog for banning games, right? And I am completely against game censorship for the simple reason that adults play games, right? And if you are unfortunate enough to be a Gen Xer or an early born millennial and live in Australia, you probably suffered through a pretty shitty time, because I think it was around 1996 when they introduced that controversial rating system that basically stopped at age 16. So any game, and I think I've talked about it before on this channel, but it bears repeating for this story, any game that fell into an adult rating, which didn't exist effectively, was effectively banned and wasn't allowed to be bought in Australia. So you had an entire stretch of time. They didn't reverse this until January 2013, which is absolutely ludicrous. But think about that. That's almost a 2-decade period of time where in Australia you could not experience an adult game. And there were lots of games that were effectively banned because of this, right? And look, I think when it comes to children, personally, we as parents, me being a parent, I think it's up to us, right? So I agree with a rating system for children, absolutely. But as an adult, I should be able to buy whatever the frick I want, right? That's been the Canadian attitude. That's been my Dutch attitude. I'm all about personal rights, freedoms, liberty, right? Well, now what the article talks about is, okay, what impact is VR going to have moving forward because of its more realistic depictions of violence? And remember, video games get banned for all kinds of reasons in these countries, right? There's some countries that are squeamish about sexuality, nudity. United Arab Emirates, a perfect example. Something like, a game that would be banned there would not be banned in Germany, because sexuality is not a big deal, right? I remember frequently seeing people topless on Dutch beaches, and it just wasn't a big deal, right? Now, where the Europeans tend to kind of get up in arms is violence. It's almost the opposite of the American approach, where violence is okay, but nudity isn't. In Europe, it's almost the other way around. Nudity's okay, but violence isn't, right? So thankfully, not all European countries are like that, but the two that I have lived in all my life, Germany a few months, so that hardly counts, hasn't been impacted by these bans. But again, it begs the question, what is going to happen to virtual reality with realistic depictions of violence, right? And my fear is that some of these countries that have been banning will just continue to do so. And countries that have recently become more lenient, like Australia, hopefully they never turn back the clock on the freedoms that they provided in January of 2013, which was to, come to the realization that adults in Australia play video games too. So, yeah, this will be one to watch because we've talked about all kinds of realism on this channel, but it's mostly the visceral adrenaline stuff, right? It's video game action, the climb, space travel, super heroic action, fantasy action, science fiction, but it's not necessarily realistic depictions of violence, right? So when that starts becoming the mainstream, this will be one to watch. Which direction is it going to go in, right? And we'll know because it's going to be here sooner rather than later. We're going to get the first slew of potentially very visceral games pretty shortly, right? Now, and interested in hearing what you guys think. What's your opinions of the rating system, right? Maybe you don't agree with me. Fair enough. Let me know in the comments, right? Or you do and have a point that I didn't consider. Now, the next news piece is one that we've already talked about on this channel. And it was one where I basically discussed 360-degree content not being true VR. And this article on Upload VR really gets into kind of the semantics and the deeper meaning of saying exactly that, right? Why the hate for 360 and not considering it real VR? For me, it's pretty simple. It is such a small subset of what can be done with virtual reality. To me, it's almost like, I wouldn't even say a spell check option, right? To VR, which is Microsoft Office, not even Word, it's Office. But that kind of gives you an idea of the scale on how I kind of consider that, right? So to me, yeah, 360-degree content, that doesn't mean it's bad. But it is not true VR in the sense that virtual reality is about exploring exactly that, a virtual reality, right? And reality around us moves forward in time, right? In all kinds of unscripted directions. And 360-degree content, put simply, does not. It's filmed from a pivot point in a movie or a documentary. Granted, that 360-degree camera moves, but it's always going to be a pre-scripted experience. At the end of the day, that's all it'll ever be. Sure, you can get choose your own adventure style paths, pick the left, pick the right, but at the end of the day, both of those were filmed as possibilities, right? So I love 360-degree content. There's some amazing stuff out there. I watched a Paul McCartney concert the other day, and he's not really the type of music that I listen to, but the experience was cool. It was pretty poor resolution wise. Like if that would have been 4K, it would have been mind blowing. It didn't even seem 1080p. It just seemed very dithery and not of high quality, but I could easily see that being the future. So yeah, it's not about hating 360 degree. It's just apples to oranges, as far as I'm concerned. It's not apples to apples, right? There's nothing wrong with that. They're just two different things. The next news story has to do with Viacom, who we all know from kind of the communications industry, and they have funded a fellowship, and there's a bunch of educational institutions that are involved in this that recently created virtual reality experiences. And what's cool with these experiences is that they really kind of go off the beaten path, right? So the first one was kind of like a murder mystery. So you take the role of a ghost. The ghost, you, cannot ascend until you figure out who killed you, right? Reveal the identity of the killer. You do that in a linear method, true, but by picking up various objects, and they show you the last few seconds or, couple of minutes of that person's life. And slowly the clues get pieced together to reveal that identity, which I thought was kind of cool. And, given the time constraints that they had, I can see why they made that a linear experience, but that would be really cool for all kinds of different applications, right? And then the other one that I thought was neat was, and it had to do with a museum. It's called Lost Museum. Basically touching display objects, which in real museums you're not supposed to do, especially not in the Vatican, right? Where they blow whistles at you and push you along. But yeah, you touch a display piece and it transports you to when that object was in use, right? And then it transports you through the ages to kind of show you that object over time, and then finally kind of how it came to rest in the museum. And that just evoked, now they've been focusing more on the before and the after, but the way I approached that was the whole freaking journey. Like, think about it. Imagine a Roman coin, okay? Minted in Rome, time of Augustus. Senator gives this coin to a secretary of the treasury who pays a general, who pays a legionnaire, right? That legionnaire gets shipped off to Gaul. And in Gaul, he dies and drops the coin. And it does not get retrieved. And over time, the successive generations of plants, trees, foliage die, reborn, die, and the topsoil rises, and this coin gets buried deeper and deeper into the earth. And a small village sprouts up in about 300 years, which becomes a town, which becomes a city, with all these lives churning, living, dying, until somebody, maybe a farmer digging in there right outside of Lyon, because that's the French city that it's grown into, finds the coin, and it ends up in a museum, right? So for a history geek like me, just awesome. Like that, I would love to have an experience like that. If anybody actually took the time, to me, that would probably be more powerful than just watching 360-degree content like a documentary. Being able to just roam in a museum, touch objects, and get a snapshot of the time period animated around me. I just think that would be amazing, right? And then to kind of travel through time with that object. So, yeah, I know, nerding it up a little bit, guys, but hey, VR is all about exactly that. It's about our imagination. And with VR, the reason I'm so into VR and have been basically my whole life is because, to me, there's endless possibilities, right? And we've shown that time and time again here in our discussions, all the different awesome directions that VR goes in. And that is no exception. The last story deals with the GTX 1070 mobility that they don't want to call mobility version. These are the laptops that are within 10% performance of the desktops, right? Like the desktop versions of the same chip. And MSI is the series that I spoke about and linked. Anyways, there's some prices appearing for these units. So the 1070 version is about $1,700. And I know that sounds like a lot, but for a laptop, it's not unusual. Laptops have always historically been more expensive than desktops, right? Power to power being equal. So what makes these just instantly awesome is as a portable VR device, right? Like, I could see wire mesh style backpacks or strap style that really just hold the perimeter and maybe a cross strap to hold the laptop in, right? Because the things don't weigh much. It's about 10 pounds, I think, 7 to 10. So, 3-4 kilo, and that's it. That's not a lot of weight for 20 to 90 minute experiences. So it's just going to open up the possibility to do stuff like that and bridge the gap until we get the wireless stuff, right? So obviously, a lot of people can't afford an HTC Vive or an Oculus Rift. The last thing they're going to spend their money on is a laptop. But for people who are maybe saving towards that, going to consider a second rig, that is now food for thought as a second rig, because it really gives you that ability not just to transport your whole VR kit to other people, other places, but to experience it wirelessly already. So hopefully there's going to be some kind of kits. I'm sure there's going to be hacks for it and people are going to do it, because we know there's companies who've designed specifically backpacks for that, right? But I'm thinking a little bit more open so that they don't, no overheating won't be an issue, etc. Yeah, so check those out. Links below. There's a whole series of them, 1060, 1070, and 1080, of course, at the link. All right, guys, that is it for the news. Cheers as always, and definitely catch you on the flip side.